My name is David Sun Kong. I'm a synthetic biologist and a community organizer and musician. And it's a pleasure here to be joined by Jaylen Brown of the Boston Celtics. Again, I think most of you know Jaylen for his exploits on the basketball court. But here today, we're here to really talk about Jaylen's passion for education, for social justice, and education reform. So just to kick things off, Jaylen, can you just share with everybody a little bit about why education is so important to you and why you want to share your story?
Good afternoon, everybody. As I moved through my educational experiences, I experienced things that I necessarily didn't have a voice or emotion for. Things that I started to learn that I experienced had terms when I got to university. So I felt some type of way about them because there's things that are hidden within our educational system that may be unseen that are affecting the social trajectories of our youth, of our kids, and are affecting basically how our minds are being shaped. So I really felt passionate about it, and I felt ever since that I learned that I wasn't just feeling things by coincidence, that these things are by design. I started to, my activism, I guess, would be like making the social awareness of what's going on.
Great. And so, let's bring it back to just the beginning. You were born in the greater Atlanta area. And can you just talk a little bit about what it was like growing up there and just the influence that your family had on you in your educational journey?
Growing up in Georgia, Atlanta's not one of the best educational schools in the world, right? I went to a public school in the Marietta area, like 15 minutes outside the city. Ended up leading me to go to Berkeley because of my experiences and stuff in basketball. But growing up in the school, I got a double consciousness basically about two sides of a coin, right? I was in honors classes because my mom and my grandma were educational advocates as well. Both of them were educators, and they forced me to be to be in honors classes. But they allowed me to take regular classes as well because they know the balance of playing sports and being a student athlete. So I got to see different rooms. I got to see different curriculums. I got to see different measures of applicants in those rooms, and they kind of gave me different perceptions and things like that. So as I maneuvered through education, I kind of didn't understand them at first, but once I got to Berkeley, I really could put a term to those words. But starting with my experience, my mom and my grandma were the first two to make sure that I knew that education was important. I remember when I was a kid, my mom and grandma in the summertime, they would make me write book reports and read when I wanted to play video games and watch basketball and stuff. So thanks, Mom, and thanks, Grandma.
And what were some of those books when you were a kid that impacted you?
That's a good question. I read a lot of Harry Potter books. Series of Unfortunate Events was very good, by Lemony Snicket. My favorite was Aragon. It's a science fiction book called Aragon, but it's like 500, 700 pages. But once again, thanks, Mom. In the summertime, that's what every kid wants to do, right?
Yeah. And so, but once you were in school, though, again, you've shared with me before, you had some pretty kind of profound experiences in the classroom where, because you were taking the honors classes, you had one experience there, but in the other classrooms, just can you talk a little bit about what that was like and sort of the expectations for the young people in the non-honor classes?
Yeah. There's things called social stratification. There's hidden curriculums. There's terms that I learned later when I got to university, but at the time I didn't know what those things were. Being in honors classes, there's a key thing that you learn that helps you with your life, and that's application. You learn how to apply what you learn in actual classrooms to the real world, and that's like the major key within our youth and with our education system. In those regular classes, I felt like there was a lack of that. A lot of times, because not the teacher's fault, because there's 35 kids in one class and there's one teacher and she's trying to control the room, as well as violence, as well as bullying going on a week-to-week basis, all at the same time. So it's kind of like they're setting you up for failure. And I've been in classrooms where the teacher comes in and just says, everybody, if you don't want to learn, just put your head down. And you can get on your phone, you can do whatever you want, I'll write you a pass. You can go wherever you want to go, just don't disturb the students who want to learn. And that was her way of trying to keep everybody kind of controlled, because it was too many students. And for her, she knew that she couldn't save everybody.
Yeah. And so I think that's something, that I've been really excited working with you on and talking with you about is kind of the nature of the system, right? There are these individual experiences, but there are all of these different systems that these students navigate. And, one of the big questions is, how do we ultimately try to address those and try to deal with those? But before we get to that, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, after you kind of got through this middle school and high school experience, again, you had this really unique talent on the basketball court, and you started getting recruited by different universities. So can you just talk a little bit about that process and that shift into being recruited for school?
Yeah, so my track turned out different not because of I had this educational experience or that was different from any other kid. I think basketball is what really was my escape. When I was 16 years old, I started being recruited heavily by colleges and potentially by the NBA at the age of 16, 17. By the time I turned 17, 18, like I can go to any college that I wanted to in the world. And a lot of people would think like that's a great feeling, right? That's a great opportunity to be able to do that. But in actuality, it caused a lot of stress and anxiety. Like I had so many options, and it was hard for me to narrow it down. And a girl that sat next to me in my class, in one of my online classes, AP World History, she tested in the top 10th percentile in the SAT. She could go to any school she wanted to in the world as well, and she was sitting right next to me in class. And I remember overhearing her talk to her friends about like why she was choosing a school and how she was narrowing it down, and it was totally opposite of, of why I was choosing a school and narrowing it down. So I asked her, can she help me narrow my list? And a lot of people ask like, Jaylen, you were number 1, number 2 player in the country. Like, why in the hell did you go to Cal? Like,
Yeah.
what was it about Berkeley? And I can't really ever give a definite answer. I toured a lot of great schools. I went to Kentucky, Kansas, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Georgia Tech, North Carolina State, a bunch of great universities, and they didn't really do it for me. I didn't feel like the type of experience that I was looking for was going to be measured in those schools. Those are not to knock any of those schools, those are great schools. Cal was on her list, right? And it was on her list. It wasn't even on my list. Cal was on her list, and Cal was on her list because the energy and the atmosphere that was surrounded Cal, like the fight, the protest, the liberalness, everything that Cal sort of embodied, and Berkeley started to embody. Berkeley in the 60s, any person of like social activists, Berkeley welcomes people in that platform to come speak on Sprout Plaza, et cetera. So once I started discovering and doing more research about, the history, more and more did it speak to me in my spirit.
And so, but let's talk about that part too, because again, Berkeley really well known for its social justice and its activism. When you were growing up, did you first start feeling your social consciousness waking up? Like, was there a particular moment that you experienced or something that happened in the world?
During my senior year in high school, Trayvon Martin had just been killed by Mike Zimmerman, or murdered, people would say. Mike Brown, the I Can't Breathe, Eric Gardner, all of that stuff was like on a social bubble my senior year in high school. So as I'm choosing the school, as I'm making a life decision, all of this is in the back of my head. And a lot of those experiences kind of helped shape me in the way I was thinking about navigating through the world. I saw the dichotomy of, people in the relationship between us and some of the things that are uncomfortable but are talked about in today's society based on race relations, based on oppression, based on certain things in those uncomfortable situations. Those definitely have an outcome on our youth. Those definitely have an outcome on your social mobility. So I wanted to make sure that I made the right decision. And at the time, that was such, an intricate part of the topics that were being talked about. I couldn't help but think about that when I was making my decision.
Right, right. And so, fast forward to going to Cal. You're at Berkeley, and Berkeley is very different from Atlanta, right? So, what was that like for you for showing up on campus, and how did you kind of acclimate at first?
Totally different, polar opposites. Atlanta is more so of a fast-paced city. People are trying to be athletes, actresses, actors, business people, et cetera. I feel like Berkeley was kind of like slow-paced, people were more, it's California, everybody, I call it California time. That's what I say. People are on California
Cal
time.
time, yeah.
And it was completely different for me. It was a breath of fresh air. For sure, I would say no better or no worse. It was just something different for me. Where I'm from, people wear, certain type of clothes, and that's considered you to be cool. At Berkeley, like, people wear Birkenstocks and pajamas. So it opened up my mind in ways that I didn't think it would. And it was great. And I remember when I first got to Berkeley, they placed us in a summer bridge program to get acclimated to the university, and that's kind of when things started to click.
Yeah, but you said though when you first got there, I mean, it was pretty challenging initially, right? When you were first getting acclimated to the academic environment. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, when I first got to Cal, when I first got to Berkeley, they have this summer bridge program for students that they want to get, acclimated to university, because Berkeley isn't one of the easiest, universities to just walk into and think you're going to be successful. So they have like a 6-week bridge program that I signed up for to take to get myself ready, and it was very intense. It was very intense. It was they put you in like a kind of like an aptitude test to basically kind of figure out where you're being pushed. And the classes they put me in were college writing and education 38. And I was thinking like, great, right? Like those 2 classes, I had to write like 8 pages every single day, like papers every single day. So it was very intense for me. And I remember calling my mom and I'm saying, Mom, I might be in over my head. Like, I think that perhaps that this is maybe too much for me. And I remember she told me, she looked at me and said, Jaylen, like, just do your best. And she said it with the patience that I needed to hear, and I did. I started to pay attention to what I was reading. I started to read for comprehension and understand, and gave myself like it changed my whole perspective of like school, to be honest, this class, and it pretty much has led to everything that is right now. I started to pay attention. I started to learn the ideas of America. I remember reading Jeannie Oakes, and I remember her talking about social stratification. I remember her talking about hidden curriculum. I remember her talking about tracking. And I remember as I'm reading this, I remember tears like hitting the page, because I was so in shock that the things that I felt growing up in school, like things that I'm learning, I can't really apply to the world while I'm at school. Like everything that I'm learning, I can't use, right? I thought that was a coincidence. Like, that's by design. They want kids to feel like that because everybody can't end up being the next political elites or government officials. Some people have to work our everyday jobs, and some people have to fill our prison systems. It's just the fact of the nature of the fact of the matter. So for me, it became like overwhelming. I was super emotional about it because I had no idea that my life was being shaped by something so systemic, and it had been shaped for a long time, like since kindergarten. It starts pre-K, kindergarten. As soon as you enter school, standardized testing places you on certain tracks, and usually it's hard to really get out of them. So I didn't know any of this while I'm in school. So when I finally figured this out, I was emotional. At first, I felt the need to overcompensate when I was at Cal, and quickly that was gone when I learned this, the overcompensation kind of feeling, because I wasn't there on the academic scholarship, was replaced with emotion. It was replaced with passion, and it was replaced with like a need and a want to try to make people more aware. Kids, youth, people were watching. I don't know how many kids probably felt the same way and that can relate to this, but you're not feeling that by coincidence. It's a design. So the more you try to, work your way around it, the better you'll be.
And so, you're developing this social awareness at Cal, and you were only there for 1 year before you got drafted and came to the NBA. When you were going into the NBA, did you already kind of know that you wanted to use that platform in a way for social causes?
Yes. So when I was in that class, my writing, because I had something that a lot of the kids didn't have, and that's an experience. A lot of them came from, higher educational, tracks where, it was more likely for them to go to Cal than somebody from Atlanta public school to go to a university like that, right?
Yeah.
So my experience became, powerful. My writing became my expertise, And I became, my thoughts and my discussions became that much more of an impact. So my teacher actually recommended me to take a graduate level course when I was at Cal, and I went to the dean of undergraduates, and he allowed me to take a graduate level class in the education department, and I learned things that I needed to learn. So in 1 year, I had a hell of an experience. I mean, I remember writing a 30-page paper as a final, as a freshman, while I'm trying to get ready for the NCAA tournament. It was a lot, but what I learned is like you can't unlearn it at that point. Things I learned in that class, I carry with me. Things I learned at Cal in general, I carry with me for the rest of my life. So I knew whatever platform I got to, if I made it to the NBA or if I didn't, that this fight would be attached with me forever.
Yeah, amazing. And so, fast forward, you get drafted by the Boston Celtics. You've now been in Boston for this your fourth year now. And Boston is also a very special place, right? There's so many different institutions of learning here. And over the past couple of years, you've really built out some relationships with very prestigious institutions, places like Harvard, places like MIT. And can you just talk a little bit about what that's been like for you?
It's been interesting. It definitely has been interesting. My first experience with higher education outside of Berkeley was Harvard. Harvard was the first school to reach out. When I was 21, I gave a 30-minute lecture at Harvard in the education department. And that kind of led to when I was 22, I got to meet David at MIT and join the fellowship program. But Harvard was the first one to reach out. And actually, you were there.
Yeah. I was,
David was there. Actually, I was watching the speech like not too long ago, and you asked me a question.
I did. I asked you a question about education, and now look at all this. So.
That makes sense. Yeah, for sure. So it kind of happened in a weird way. A lot of people are like, why is Jaylen on the stage, or how did he get to where he's at now? Like, what steps did he take? He only did 1 year in college. Why is he at Harvard giving speeches, and why is he an MIT fellow? It doesn't make sense. So I guess it kind of happened. For those who don't know, I shared my experience to a reporter one time, and I thought it was just like some regular reporter. Turns out he was like one of the biggest reporters in the world for whatever, I don't know. But and it went viral. It went totally viral. I said that I learned at Cal in one of my classes that sports can be used as a mechanism for control in society. Not to say sports is a negative thing, but it also is an escape for a lot of people, and not a kind of like a distraction. A lot of people, use their emotional stress to vent through sports and other things, similar music and things like that. And if they didn't have those venues, they would use that energy in maybe not so positive manners, especially people of color and people that are disadvantaged. So I said some statements like that along with a bunch of other stuff, and they picked it up and the world went crazy with it. Trump commented on it or whatever, and then Harvard reached out for me to come at 21 give a lecture about it. And I gave a lecture that was like 45 minutes long, probably talked way too much. People and people really took to it, and a lot of people could relate, and a lot of people agreed with it. And then it led to me being able to spend some time at MIT. Now I'm developing a program that I'll mention in a little bit, but it all kind of happened in that sense.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Again, I know for me it's been really amazing getting to know you better and building with you over the past year. And part of what I think, that I personally believe as well is, when you're part of an institution, a place like MIT or a place like Harvard, or if you're a professional basketball player, we have all of this privilege, and how do you ultimately leverage that privilege and try to, really try to do some good in the world? And so, one of the things that we've been working on together, and that has been a part of your fellowship, has been this idea of building out a youth and learning initiative. And so, can you just talk a little bit about that, the vision for that, and why it's important to you?
So similar to the program that I was placed in to get acclimated to university, they called it the Summer Bridge program. I'm starting kind of a similar one at MIT, and I'm calling it the Bridge program, but I'm starting it earlier. The purpose of the one in college that was to get you acclimated to university, so you could be prepared as you go through whatever navigate, school. For this one, I wanted to not only just get them ready for university, I wanted to get them ready for life, and start at an earlier age by giving them leadership skills, but also giving them the awareness of the barriers that are around them and how to navigate them and help people around them navigate them. So very similar, and that's kind of where the coincidence and the idea sparked from college and Berkeley and some of the things that I've experienced. But a part of my journey, a part of my insight, a part of my the things that I've seen is for me to spread it and pass it along to those who need to hear it or looking to hear it and don't have anybody to help them navigate it. So the plan is to kind of take a group of kids. The plan is to take a group of kids right here in Boston and Dorchester and create a curriculum at MIT based around leadership, based around, educational advocacies, basically reintroducing how to learn. Not only just teaching them how to learn, but the applicants applying what you learn in school to the actual real world. And I think that's a very vocal part into learning in today's society. So I'm appreciative from MIT for helping me develop this plan and this platform, and I'm looking forward to it.
And so just to say as well, and I think it'll be including Dorchester, but also a variety of other neighborhoods throughout the Boston area. So stay tuned as we continue to design and build that out. One other part I thought was interesting, we've talked about before, and you mentioned this when you were growing up, all the different books that you read and so on. How do we kind of make science and learning cool, right? I think one thing that's been really amazing just to see over time, the MBA and particularly for you, there's a real cultural impact that athletes have now. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, the ways that, in your role as an MBA player, but also the impact of the culture could help to change some of the dynamics around learning for our young people.
I think that's important. I think that for some reason learning is considered boring right now amongst our youth, or not cool or corny or whatever the words that some of the kids nowadays use. But I want to be a part of the narrative that changes that. I think it's 2019. I think there's a million different ways for people to be successful, and there's a million different ways for people to be enlightened. I think this generation has been the most informed generation that people have necessarily experienced. So I want to be a part of bridging that gap between, the kind of the coolness factor and then the learning factor, and making that all a part of one. Because I still remember the feeling when I walked into MIT. Like, not a lot of people where I'm from, the neighborhoods that I've even had, it's not even a thought. MIT and Harvard is not even a thought. I remember I walked in to MIT, I was nervous. I was nervous, but also was confident, excited, and intrigued. And some of the things that I got to see and explore kind of blew my socks off, right? So I want to give, kids that same experience and that same opportunity that I have. And that's what the Bridge program is kind of about.
Beautiful. And so just to conclude and wrap up, is there a message, if you wanted to share a message to some of the young people out there that, may have shared some of the similar experiences you, or if they've, been listening to this conversation, may have resonated with some of your experiences, what would you want to say to them?
Absolutely. I think the idea of America is that some people have to win and some people have to lose, and this idea is filtered through our education system. Certain people, like I said, will be political elites, government officials. Others will fill our everyday jobs and unfortunately fill our prison systems. Young people, this isn't a coincidence that you feel the way you feel. When you're going throughout school and you feel like the things that you're learning in school aren't necessarily being applied to real life, there's names for some of those terms, and you're not alone. I think there's a lack of applicants being taught into our school, and I've said this before, education is the key, but application is ignition, and we must merge the both of them for our vehicles to be able to move forward. So I think this generation is more intelligent, more woke, more empowered than ever, and let's continue to raise the awareness and continue the activism to help, fight some of these issues that we deal with on a daily basis. Don't not talk about them and not discuss them because they are uncomfortable. And the people who do know them, who are successful, don't brush them under the rug because you're successful, or don't say, I made it, so I'm just gonna worry about myself. Yes, I'm successful. Yes, I'm an MBA. yes, I make a certain amount of money, but just because I escaped the barriers that society has put up, why should I forget about the people who didn't or won't? So I challenge the people who do know the things that I'm talking about to get out there and try to make a difference, and that's it.
Thank you guys.